When Kobe Bryant walked into the emergency waiting room of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday in February, he had not planned to be there. He had been driving home from a late film session at a facility in Culver City and had taken a wrong turn and then another wrong turn, and somewhere in that unnecessary detour had ended up on San Vicente Boulevard, where he saw through the glass doors of the emergency entrance a man sitting alone on a plastic chair with his head in his hands, and something about the particular shape of that posture. The absolute collapse of it stopped Kobe entirely. What he found when he pushed through those doors and sat down in the chair beside that man was a story that he could not have prepared for, and what he did in the hours that followed would travel from a hospital billing office to an operating room to a community in Compton that had been quietly falling apart for years. The question was never whether David Reyes deserved help. He deserved it more completely than almost anyone Kobe had encountered. The question was whether one man stopping at 3 in the morning was enough to hold back everything that was threatening to take a family under. Nobody, not David, not his wife Carmen, not the doctor who would later tell this story with tears on his face, could have known what that accidental wrong turn was actually the beginning of. Kobe almost didn't stop. He had been awake since 6 that morning, and the film session had run 2 hours longer than scheduled, and the drive home should have taken 25 minutes and had already taken 40, and all he wanted was to be horizontal in a dark room with the day finally behind him. He saw the man through the glass and slowed, and then told himself it was not his business, and kept driving and made it approximately 1 block before he turned the car around. He would think about that block for a long time afterward. The waiting room was the particular kind of ugly that only hospitals achieve: the fluorescent lights, the worn chairs, the smell of antiseptic and anxiety. The television mounted in the corner playing a cable news channel with the volume off and closed captions running that nobody was reading. There were 3 other people in the room: a young woman with a sleeping child across her lap, and an older couple sitting very close together not speaking, and the man with his head in his hands at the far end of the row. Kobe sat down 1 chair away. The man did not look up. "Are you okay?" Kobe asked. The man lifted his head slowly and looked at Kobe with the blank, exhausted eyes of someone who had been sitting in that chair for long enough that the boundaries between things had started to dissolve. He was somewhere in his mid-40s. Dark hair going gray at the temples. A work-roughened face, the kind of face that had spent years outdoors. The hands on his knees were large and calloused, and one of them had a cut across the knuckles that had been hastily bandaged. "My son," he said. His voice came out scraped thin, "is in surgery?" Kobe leaned forward slightly. "How old? 9? The man said. They sat in silence for a moment. The television cycled through its soundless news. "What happened?" Kobe asked. "Appendix," the man said. "Ruptured. They said he's going to be okay." They said it, but his eyes went somewhere else for a moment. When you hear that in a place like this, you don't fully believe it until you see them walking toward you. Kobe nodded. The man looked at him then properly for the first time, his eyes doing the slow recognition that Kobe had learned to read over the years, the narrowing, the slight recalibration. "You're the Kobe Bryant," he said. "I am." Kobe said. The man stared at him for another moment, and then something that was almost a laugh moved through him. Not a real laugh, just the body's way of acknowledging the absurdity of the specific moment. "My son is going to lose his mind," he said. "He has your poster." Kobe smiled. "What's his name?" "Miguel," the man said. "David Reyes," he added, offering his own name with the instinctive courtesy of someone who had been raised to introduce himself even when the world was falling apart around him. They talked for an hour. David told him about Miguel, about the way the boy had complained about his stomach all day at school and the teacher had sent him home early, and Carmen had thought it was something he ate, and by 8 in the evening the pain was different enough that they knew, and by 9 they were at the hospital, and by 10 the surgeon was explaining what needed to happen, and now it was 3 in the morning and David was in the waiting room because he could not sit in the family room with Carmen and her mother because the 2 women needed each other in a way that had no room for him, and he needed to be somewhere he could be afraid without performing anything. Kobe listened to all of it. He asked about Miguel's school and David told him about the elementary school in Compton where Miguel was in 4th grade and where the class had 31 students and 2 working computers and a reading program that had been cut the previous year when the district lost its funding. David talked about Miguel the way fathers talk about sons who have not yet been disappointed by the world, with a fierce protective pride that carried inside it the knowledge that the world would eventually try. David worked construction, he said. Had his own small crew. 3 guys, a truck and a trailer. They did residential renovation, mostly bathrooms and kitchens. It was enough most of the time, enough meaning the margin was narrow and required nothing to go wrong. Kobe looked at his hands. Nothing went wrong, he said. David looked at him. The bill. He said after a moment, his voice dropping and going flat in the way voices do when they reach the thing they have been not saying. Surgery like this with no insurance. You don't have insurance? Kobe said. We had it, David said, until February 1st, the company I was subcontracting for dropped us. He looked at the floor. 31 days ago. 31 days, Kobe repeated. David nodded and said nothing more because there was nothing more to say. Kobe was quiet for a while. The television cycled silently and the young woman across the room shifted and the child in her lap stirred without waking. What's the surgeon's name? Kobe asked. David looked at him. Dr. Okafor, he said. Kobe nodded and took out his phone. By 4:15. He had reached his personal attorney, who had reached the hospital's patient financial services director, who had agreed to speak with someone from Kobe's team when the office opened at 8, and by 4:30 Kobe had also placed 2 calls that he did not tell David about, one to a contractor he had worked with on foundation projects, and one to his own business manager. David watched him make the calls without asking questions. When Kobe put the phone away, David looked at him for a long moment. Why are you doing this? He said. Kobe thought about the block he had driven before turning around. I made a wrong turn, he said, and then I almost made another one. David looked at him without fully understanding, and Kobe did not explain further because some things explain themselves better over time. At 5:40 a surgeon in scrubs appeared in the doorway of the waiting room, and David stood up so fast the chair scraped back, and the surgeon said, he's out, and he did well, and David put one hand over his mouth and Kobe stood beside him, and the surgeon said, you can see him in about an hour, and David turned and looked at Kobe with an expression that had no category for what was in it, just the raw, unfiltered face of a man who had just been handed back the thing he could not have survived losing. Kobe put a hand on his shoulder. Go be with your wife, he said. David went. Kobe sat back down in the plastic chair and stayed for another 20 minutes in the empty waiting room. The television still cycling soundlessly and the fluorescent lights still doing what fluorescent lights do, and he thought about Miguel in a recovery room and Carmen in a family room and David walking toward them both, and he thought about 31 days and how thin the margin was and how close everything always was to the edge, and how many people were sitting in waiting rooms exactly like this one all over the city right now with the same arithmetic running in their heads. He left before David came back. The financial services director took the call at 8:15, and by 9 the outstanding balance on Miguel Reyes's surgery had been cleared entirely and a note had been placed in the account indicating the matter was resolved. The director later said it was the most efficient call he had taken in 14 years. The contractor call produced results within a week. Kobe had asked for a complete assessment of the Reyes family home in Compton, a 3-bedroom house that David owned with a mortgage that still had 11 years on it and that had, according to the assessment, a roof that was 3 years past its service life, a water heater that was being held together by optimism, and a bathroom that had been on David's list to renovate for 2 years but had never moved to the top because there was always something more urgent. The contractor's crew spent 4 days on the house while Miguel was still recovering at home, and David kept trying to help and kept being told politely but firmly to sit down. Miguel watched the crew work from the living room couch wrapped in a blanket with a pillow behind him and a bowl of soup his grandmother had made, and his mother checked on him every 30 minutes and his father checked on him every 15 minutes and did not say anything about Kobe because he had not yet found the right words and because Miguel would not have believed it anyway. He believed it on the Thursday afternoon 2 weeks after the surgery when Kobe showed up at the front door. David had called ahead this time, had asked and been given a yes, and had told Carmen, and Carmen had told her mother, who had immediately begun cooking enough food for 8 people, which was her response to every significant event in life regardless of its emotional register. Miguel was on the couch when the doorbell rang and David answered it and brought Kobe into the living room, and Miguel looked up from the couch and looked at Kobe and then looked at his father and then looked at Kobe again and said in a voice that was entirely unlike any voice he had used before in his 9 years of life, "Is that really you?" "It's really me," Kobe said and sat down on the couch beside him. They talked for 2 hours. Kobe asked about school and Miguel told him about his teacher, Mrs. Sandoval, who was the best teacher he had ever had, and about the 2 computers in the classroom that were always being used by someone else, and about how he wanted to be a basketball player or a doctor. He had not decided, and Kobe said, "Those are not mutually exclusive," and Miguel said, "What does that mean?" and Kobe said, "It means you don't have to choose," before he left. Kobe asked David to step outside and they stood on the new porch which the contractor had also repaired, and Kobe told him about the foundation's partnership with a workforce development program that connected small construction businesses with city contract opportunities and gave them the administrative infrastructure to bid on larger projects. David listened with the stillness of a man who had learned that good things came with catches and waited for the catch. "There isn't one," Kobe said. "Just the work." David looked at him. "You really just made a wrong turn," he said. Kobe looked at the street. "I almost didn't stop," he said. "I drove a block first." David was quiet for a moment, looking at the same street. "Miguel is going to tell this story his whole life," he said. Kobe nodded and looked at the house, at the new roof, at the fixed porch, at the light in the living room window where Carmen and her mother were almost certainly still cooking, and he thought about a plastic chair at 3 in the morning and a man with his head in his hands and the particular shape of a posture that says everything without saying anything, and he thought about how close he had come to driving past it and how the difference between stopping and not stopping was 1 block and one decision made in the dark without any information about what was waiting on the other side of it. Within 18 months, David Reyes Construction had secured 2 city subcontracts and hired 2 additional crew members, and Miguel was back at school with Mrs. Sandoval, and the classroom had received a technology grant that the foundation had facilitated quietly and without announcement, and there were now 8 computers where there had been 2 and a reading program where there had been none. Dr. Okafor, the surgeon, heard the full story from a colleague 3 months after the surgery and called the foundation office and asked to speak to someone, and when the foundation director called him back, he said, "I have been a surgeon for 22 years and I have never had a reason to tell a patient's story before, but I want you to know what happened in that operating room." The director said, "Tell me." He said the boy came in with a ruptured appendix that had been untreated for longer than it should have been because the family had waited before coming in, and he said in situations like that the outcome is not always what it was in Miguel's case, and he said, "I don't know why I'm telling you this except that I want someone to know that the margin was closer than the family understands, and that whoever made sure that family didn't have to think about money while they were thinking about their son did something that I don't have a medical term for." The director thanked him and relayed the message to Kobe that evening. Kobe was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then he said, "Make a note of the doctor's name." She asked why. "Because people like that," he said, "deserve to be known." The note was made, and 3 months later the foundation hosted a community health event in Compton at which Dr. Okafor was invited to speak not about Miguel specifically but about pediatric emergency care in underserved communities and what happens when financial anxiety delays families from seeking treatment. He spoke for 20 minutes to an audience of parents and teachers and community workers, and he was direct and specific and did not soften anything, and when he finished there was a silence in the room that was not emptiness but the weight of people recognizing something they had already known and hearing it named out loud for the first time. Carmen Reyes was in the audience. She had come because David had told her about the event and because she had heard that the doctor who operated on Miguel would be speaking, and she wanted to see him outside the context of the hospital, outside the scrubs and the controlled urgency of that night, and so she sat in the third row and listened. And when Dr. Okafor described the window between when symptoms appear and when families feel able to seek care without thinking about money, she recognized it so precisely that she had to press her hand flat against her sternum for a moment to keep herself level. She introduced herself afterward, and he remembered her son immediately. Remembered the case with the specific clinical precision of surgeons who carry certain outcomes in a separate chamber of their memory. He is doing well, she said. I'm glad, he said, and he looked at her with the honest eyes of someone who means a simple thing completely afterward. Carmen stood in the parking lot for a while before getting in the car. She called David and told him about the event and about meeting the doctor again, and David was quiet on the phone for a moment, and then he said, "Do you remember the night in the waiting room when you asked me what I was doing out there for so long, and I said I just needed some air?" She remembered. I met someone. He said she already knew it had not been the night he told her about Kobe. It had been 3 days later when Miguel was home and recovering, and she had found David sitting at the kitchen table at midnight with a look on his face that she had not seen before. A look that had something to do with disbelief and something to do with gratitude and something else that she did not have a word for. So she had sat down across from him and said, "Tell me." And he had told her all of it, the wrong turns and the plastic chair and the 3 a.m. phone calls and the contractor and the door and the porch. She had listened without interrupting, the way she always listened, which was completely. When he finished, she sat for a while and then she said he turned around. David nodded. 1 block, she said. 1 block. He said. She looked at the table and then at her husband and said, "I want to teach Miguel that." "Teach him what?" "That 1 block. David," she said, "1 block is the difference between the person you could be and the person you are." They sat with that for a while in the kitchen at midnight, with the house quiet around them and Miguel asleep down the hall with his poster on the wall in his stomach. And some debts have no currency. You can pay them in except to become the kind of person who also turns around. If this story moved you, drop your city and country in the comments below. And if you believe that turning around is always worth it, please hit that like button and subscribe. Click the video on your screen right now for another story that will stay with you.